Welcome back to the deep dive. We have an absolute mountain of sources on the table today, and honestly, the subject matter is it's heavy.
It really is.
We're looking at a figure who defined the 16th century so completely that he literally has two different names depending on, well, where you're standing on the map.
It is a fascinating duality right out of the gate. If you were a European in the 1500s and you were looking east with this, mix of terror and begrudging respect, you knew him as Suleiman the Magnificent.
Right. The ultimate symbol of Oriental splendor and, frankly, military threat.
Absolutely. But if you were one of his own people, and we're talking about a massive population.
25 million subjects, the notes say.
25 million. You didn't call him magnificent. You called him Kanuni Suleiman.
The Lawgiver.
The Lawgiver, exactly. And that distinction, that single difference, it tells you everything about the scope of our deep dive today.
Yeah, we aren't just talking about a warlord.
Not at all. We are talking about a man whose reign spanned 46 years. From 1520 to 1566, which is, the longest rule of any Ottoman Sultan.
46 years.
And he was managing a domain that wasn't just a country, it was a transcontinental superpower.
I was looking at the map provided in the source material, and the scale is it's hard to wrap your head around.
It is.
It stretches from Algiers in the west all the way to Baghdad in the east.
And then from Budapest in the north down to the Persian Gulf, it was, for all intents and purposes, the center of the world.
And he knew it.
Oh, he absolutely knew it. If you look at the titles he claimed for himself, it gives you this terrifying window into his psychology.
Right.
He didn't see himself as just a Turkish ruler. He claimed to be the Caesar of Rome.
Caesar of Rome is a particularly bold claim for someone sitting in Istanbul.
Well, in his mind, and in the Ottoman mind, by holding Constantinople, he was the legitimate heir to the Roman Empire.
The Third Rome.
Exactly. And he also called himself the Shah of Baghdad and the custodian of the two holy mosques. He saw himself as the universal ruler, the intersection of Islam, the Roman tradition, and Persian kingship, all in one person.
So our mission today is to unpack the man behind that massive list of titles. We need to understand how he expanded this empire to its absolute logistical breaking point.
And it really did break.
And then how he completely re-engineered the legal system for centuries. And then we have to get into the personal drama, which, reading these notes, it feels more like a Shakespearean tragedy than history.
It really is. It's a story of a golden age, tulips, breathtaking architecture, immense wealth, but it's all built on a foundation of fratricide, execution, and a very lonely kind of power.
It's a lot to cover. Before we dive into the battles, just, picture the visual of this era.
Yeah.
This isn't the dusty, declining empire of later centuries. This is the era of vibrant tiles, expanding horizons, and just absolute confidence.
A sense of destiny.
Let's start where he started. The year is 1520. Suleiman takes the throne. He's young, 26 years old. And his father, Suleiman I, was known as the Grim, which suggests he was a tough act to follow.
Suleiman was brutal, but very effective. He had secured the Middle East and Egypt, and he filled the treasury to the brim. But Suleiman immediately pivots. He looks west.
His father had been focused on the Islamic world.
Right. Suleiman wanted Europe, and his opening moves were just a blitzkrieg.
He targets Belgrade in 1521. So why Belgrade? What's the significance?
You have to understand the geography. Belgrade was the gateway to Central Europe. It was this massive fortress city that had stopped the Ottomans before.
It had a reputation.
The big one. His own great-grandfather, Mehmed the Conqueror.
The man who took Constantinople.
That guy. Even he failed to take Belgrade. It was a stain on the family honor.
So taking it isn't just strategic, it's symbolic. It proves he's better than his ancestors.
Precisely. It's a statement. He encircled it with, they say, 250,000 soldiers and over 100 ships. He set up this heavy bombardment from an island in the Danube.
And it falls.
It falls. And that sent a shockwave through every royal court in Europe. The door to Hungary and Austria was suddenly kicked wide open.
But he doesn't march through that door right away. He takes a detour to the Mediterranean.
Yeah, he has to deal with the Knights Hospitaller on Rhodes.
We've mentioned them in previous deep dives. These are essentially the pirate monks, right?
That's a fair description. A Catholic military order, a leftover from the Crusades, and they are dug in on the island of Rhodes.
And they're a problem.
A huge problem. They were using it as a base to harass all Ottoman shipping between Egypt and Istanbul. It was a stranglehold on his internal trade. He couldn't ignore it.
So in 1522, he launches a massive naval invasion.
And this shows his commitment to logistics. It's not just about brute force. The Ottomans actually built Marmaris Castle on the mainland just to serve as a staging ground for this one operation. But the siege itself was a nightmare. It lasted 5 months. The casualties were horrific. Some sources say up to 60,000 Ottoman troops died.
60,000?
From combat and disease. It was a meat grinder.
For one tiny island. That is an incredibly high price to pay.
It is. But eventually the knights just couldn't hold out. They capitulated. And this is where we get our first real glimpse of Suleiman's complex character.
How so?
After losing tens of thousands of men, you'd expect a massacre. You'd expect heads on pikes.
Total annihilation.
Instead, he allowed the knights to leave.
He just let them go?
He let them pack up their weapons, their icons, and just sail away with their lives. It was this act of chivalry that surprised everyone.
Of course, that decision would come back to haunt the Ottomans later.
Big time. But at that moment, it established him as a magnificent and honorable victor.
So he secures his southern flank. Now he turns back to that open door in Europe.
Hungary.
And this leads us to the Battle of Mohacs in 1526. The sources describe this as a complete and utter catastrophe for Hungary.
Mohacs is one of those pivotal moments in world history that is, often glossed over in Western curriculums, but it changed the map of Europe forever.
What happened?
The Hungarian king, Louis II, he decided to meet Suleiman in open battle. It was tactical suicide.
Why was it such a mismatch? I mean, Hungarian knights had a fierce reputation.
They did, but this was a new kind of war. It was about firepower. The Ottomans had mastered the use of field artillery and musketry in a way the Hungarians just hadn't.
So the Hungarians charged.
Their heavy cavalry charged, thinking they could break the Ottoman lines like they always had. But the Ottomans just opened up their ranks, let the cavalry ride straight through.
Into a trap.
And then unleashed point-blank cannon and musket fire from 3 sides. The battle was effectively over in 2 hours.
2 hours to destroy an entire kingdom. That is terrifying efficiency.
And the king himself, Louis II, was killed in the retreat. He drowned in a marsh because his armor was too heavy. He was only 20 years old.
And with him, the Jagiellonian dynasty in Hungary just ends.
It ends, the kingdom collapses, it gets partitioned between the Ottomans, the Habsburgs, and a vassal state in Transylvania. But there's a quote from Suleiman here that I find absolutely fascinating.
What is it?
He's standing on the battlefield, surrounded by carnage, and he's looking at the body of this 20-year-old king, and he says, "I came indeed in arms against him, but it was not my wish that he should be thus cut off before he scarcely tasted the sweets of life and royalty."
That is surprisingly human. He's the conqueror, but he's mourning the waste of it all.
It shows he wasn't a mindless butcher. He saw himself as a noble rival, engaged in a great game. But this victory sets him on a collision course with his ultimate enemy.
The Habsburgs.
The Habsburgs. Specifically, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and his brother Ferdinand. And this leads us to 1529 and the famous Siege of Vienna.
This is the high water mark, right? The moment the Ottoman wave finally broke.
That is the traditional narrative, and it did break, but we need to look at why it broke. Suleiman marched all the way to the gates of Vienna. It was the furthest any Ottoman army had ever gone. But the Austrian garrison, they weren't the main problem.
I thought they put up this heroic defense.
They did. They were heroic. But they only had about 16,000 men against Suleiman's massive army. The real enemy was the weather.
The classic defeat for invading armies. General Winter.
Or in this case, General Autumn Mud. It was a torrential season. The rain turned the roads into swamps. The Ottoman army was just bogged down.
And that affects the supply lines.
Critically, they had to leave their heavy siege cannons behind, the big wall smashers. They physically couldn't drag them through the mud.
So he arrives at the strongest fortress in Central Europe without the tools to actually break in.
Exactly. He tried mining under the walls, but without the heavy guns to create a major breach, he couldn't break through before winter set in. He had no choice but to withdraw. It was a logistical failure, not a military one.
So he turns back. But here's what I found interesting in the notes. Even though he didn't take the city, he seems to have won the diplomatic war that followed.
Oh, he absolutely did.
There's a treaty from 1533 that sounds incredibly humiliating for the Austrians.
The Treaty of Constantinople. It is a masterclass in diplomatic insults. Ferdinand I, the Habsburg ruler, was desperate for peace, and Suleiman agreed, but on very specific terms.
Well, where are they?
First, Ferdinand had to acknowledge Suleiman as his father and suzerain.
Father, that establishes a very clear hierarchy.
Oh, it gets worse. The treaty stipulated that Ferdinand, who was the king of Austria and brother to the Holy Roman Emperor, was not equal to the Sultan.
Who was he equal to?
He was considered equal only to the Ottoman Grand Vizier.
So, you are not on my level. You are on the level of my employee.
Exactly. Talk to my manager. It was a brilliant way of delegitimizing the Habsburg claim to being emperors. Suleiman was saying, in no uncertain terms, there is only one emperor on earth, and it is me.
That secured the Western Front, at least for a while. But while all this is happening, he's also dealing with this massive headache in the east.
The Safavid Empire in Persia.
Right. And this is crucial context. We often focus on the Ottoman wars with Christian Europe, but this rivalry with the Safavids was maybe even more intense.
It was ideological. The Ottomans were the champions of Sunni Islam. The Safavids were the great Shia power. This was a battle for the soul of the Islamic world.
And the fighting style was completely different, wasn't it?
Night and day. In Europe, armies met in pitched battles. In Persia, the Safavid Shah, Kahmasp, he knew he couldn't beat Suleiman's cannons in a straight fight.
So he didn't fight.
He refused. He used scorched earth tactics.
Explain that for the listener who might not know the term.
As the massive Ottoman army advanced, the Persians would just retreat. But as they retreated, they burned all the crops, destroyed the villages, and poisoned the wells behind them.
So they leave nothing for the invaders.
Nothing. They lured Suleiman deep into the mountains of the Caucasus and the Iranian plateau, stretching his supply lines thinner and thinner until the army was starving and freezing in the harsh winters.
It sounds miserable. You march 1,000 miles and there's no one to fight and nothing to eat.
It was exhausting and incredibly expensive. Suleiman launched 3 of these major campaigns in 1534, 1548, and 1553.
Did he achieve anything?
He did achieve strategic goals. He captured Baghdad in 1534, which was a huge symbolic victory. That gave him control of the old Abbasid capital. But he could never fully conquer Persia. The land itself fought against him.
But he did get a treaty eventually.
The Peace of Amasya in 1555, it finally stabilized the border. The Ottomans kept Iraq, which was crucial because it gave them access to the Persian Gulf. The Persians kept Tabriz and Azerbaijan. It was a hard-won stalemate.
That access to the Persian Gulf is key because it connects to a part of the map if most people don't associate with the Ottomans at all.
The Indian Ocean.
Exactly. This is one of those overlooked aspects of Suleiman's global strategy.
It really is. We usually think of them as a Mediterranean power, maybe a Black Sea power, but this was a world war.
A world war against who?
The Portuguese. They had rounded Africa and were violently disrupting the traditional spice trade routes that had fueled the Ottoman and Mamluk economies for centuries. Suleiman couldn't let that happen.
So he's sending Ottoman fleets to fight the Portuguese off the coast of India.
And beyond. We have records of Ottoman naval operations in Yemen trying to secure Aden. They fought in Gujarat, India. They even sent an expedition to Ice.
Icy. That's in modern-day Indonesia. That is incredibly far from Istanbul.
It's halfway around the world. The Sultan of Ice asked for help against the Portuguese, and Suleiman sent gunners and ships. This was a global response to European colonial expansion.
And he was talking to other major powers in the region.
Yes. There are even letters exchanged between Suleiman and the great Mughal emperor in India, Akbar the Great. They were trying to coordinate.
That just completely changes the perspective. It's not just Turks versus Austria. It's a global trade war over spices and sea lanes.
Absolutely. And while he's fighting this global war, he's also tightening his grip closer to home. He turns the Mediterranean into what some historians call an Ottoman lake.
And he does that thanks to one man, primarily.
Barbarossa.
Khayr ad-Din Barbarossa, the legendary corsair. This guy deserves a deep dive of his own someday.
He really does. Suleiman had the foresight to take this, independent pirate king from North Africa and make him the Grand Admiral of the entire Ottoman fleet.
And Barbarossa delivers.
He rebuilds the navy from the ground up. His victory at the Battle of Preveza in 1538 against a combined Holy League fleet of Spanish, Venetian, and Papal ships was a masterpiece. It secured Ottoman naval dominance for decades.
They captured Tripoli as well.
Well, his successor Turgut Reis did in 1551. North Africa, from Egypt to Algiers, was firmly under Ottoman control.
But not forever. Naval dominance is a tricky thing to hold, and we have to mention Malta.
The Great Siege of Malta in 1565. This was near the end of Suleiman's life, and it was a matter of unfinished business.
He wanted to finally finish off those knights he had let go at Rhodes, 40 years earlier.
Exactly. They had been given Malta by the Holy Roman Emperor, and they were up to their old tricks raiding Ottoman ships. So Suleiman sent a massive force to wipe them out once and for all.
But this time, it didn't work.
This time, the knights held on. It was one of the most brutal sieges in history. Despite a massive bombardment, the Ottomans failed to take the island. The arrival of a Spanish relief force finally broke the siege. It was a major defeat.
And a sign, maybe, that the empire was reaching its physical limits.
I think so. It was a foreshadowing that the era of easy, dramatic conquests was coming to an end.
Which feels like a good moment to shift gears. We've talked a lot about the warrior sultan and the Caesar. Let's talk about the name his own people used, the Lawgiver.
This is so vital. In the West, we obsess over the battles. But in the East, his most enduring legacy is the legal structure he created.
So what was the problem he was trying to solve?
You have to understand the problem he faced. The Ottoman Empire had two parallel types of law. There's Sharia, which is divine Islamic law. It's based on the Quran. It's considered unchangeable.
And then there's the other type.
Kanun, which is Sultanic law. These are the regulations about taxes, land tenure, criminal law, the stuff of day-to-day administration.
And I assume that after a few centuries, the Kanun laws had become a complete mess.
A chaotic patchwork. You had contradictory rules from different sultans, local customs, clashing with imperial decrees. It was a bureaucratic nightmare.
So what did Suleiman do?
His great innovation was to order a massive project. He had his jurists collect all of the judgments from the 9 preceding Ottoman sultans. They analyzed them, removed all the contradictions, and codified them into a single, coherent legal system.
The Kanuni Osmani.
The Ottoman laws. And the crucial part was that he had to make sure this newer, streamlined code didn't violate the principles of Sharia.
That sounds like a very delicate dance.
It was. And he worked hand in glove with his Grand Mufti, the highest religious authority, a brilliant jurist named Ebusud Effendi. Together, they managed to harmonize the administrative needs of a modern state with the moral imperatives of Islamic law.
And this code? It lasted.
It was so robust, it remained the backbone of the empire for over 300 years.
And this wasn't just abstract legal theory. The notes say it had real effects on people's lives. I read about his reforms in criminal law.
Yes. He reduced the instances of death penalties and mutilation, especially for more minor crimes, and prescribed set fines instead. He was trying to standardize justice so it wasn't just up to the whim of a local governor.
There's also a fascinating detail in here about minority rights. We often hear about the persecution of Jews in Europe. During this exact time, the Inquisition is in full swing in Spain. But Suleiman takes a very different stance.
This is a really important point. And it's largely thanks to the influence of his personal physician, a man named Moses Haman, who was a Spanish Jew whose family had fled the Inquisition.
And Haman had the Sultan's ear.
He did. And through Haman's influence and Suleiman's own sense of order and justice, the Sultan issued a royal decree that formally denounced blood libels against Jews throughout the empire.
Could you explain blood libel for those who might not know?
It was a pernicious, completely false rumor that was common in medieval Europe that Jews secretly used the blood of Christian children for their Passover rituals.
And it was used as an excuse to start pogroms, massacres.
Exactly. Suleiman legally forbade this accusation in his empire. At a time when Europe was expelling its Jewish populations, the Ottoman Empire became a major sanctuary for them.
It really highlights a profound difference in governance. He was also investing heavily in education, right?
Massive investment. He founded new madrasas, Islamic schools that had the status of universities. He wanted to professionalize the entire clerical and administrative class of the empire, a state run by an educated meritocracy, not just an inherited nobility.
This focus on structure and high culture brings us neatly to the Golden Age. You can't talk about Suleiman without talking about the look of the empire. And one name just dominates this entire era, Mimar Sinan.
Sinan is, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, one of the greatest architects in human history. He was to Suleiman what Michelangelo was to the Pope.
What was his background?
He actually started as a military engineer in the Janissaries, building bridges and fortifications. But his talent was so immense that Suleiman made him the chief court architect. He went on to design over 300 buildings.
And his masterpiece is the Suleimani complex in Istanbul.
It is breathtaking. It still defines the skyline of the city, But the key thing to understand is that it's not just a mosque.
It's a social complex.
It was a city within a city. It included a hospital, a soup kitchen that fed thousands of the poor every day, multiple schools, a public bath, a library.
It was a physical statement of what the state provided for its people.
Exactly. And architecturally, what Sinan did was revolutionary. He used this system of cascading domes and semi-domes to create a unified, light-filled interior space that just seems to defy gravity. He was deliberately trying to rival, and in his view, surpass, the ancient Hagia Sophia next door.
It's all about one-upmanship with them, isn't it?
Always.
Which, speaking of rivaling the West, we have to talk about the bling, the crown. I read about this 4-tiered crown, and I couldn't believe the audacity of it.
This is a wonderful detail. You have to remember, the Pope wore a 3-tiered tiara, the papal tiara, symbolizing his spiritual authority over the world.
Okay.
So, Suleiman commissioned a spectacular helmet crown from the best goldsmiths in Venice that had 4 tiers.
Just to one-up the Pope. That is petty in the most magnificent way possible.
Literally, it cost 115,000 ducats, which was an astronomical sum. And the 4 tiers symbolized his dominion over the 4 cardinal directions, east, west, north, and south. The whole world.
And you'd wear this thing.
He would wear it during parades to absolutely dazzle foreign ambassadors. He was visually shouting from the rooftops, "I am above your Pope and I am above your Emperor."
He was a showman. But the sources also say he was a poet.
A very prolific one. He wrote under the pen name Muhibi, which means the lover. And this isn't just, amateur hour poetry. His work is considered high quality in the classical Ottoman tradition.
What did he write about?
He wrote a lot about the burden of leadership. There's one famous line that goes something like, "The people think of wealth and power as the greatest fate, but in this world, a spell of health is the best state."
Health is better than power. That's deeply ironic coming from the most powerful man on earth.
It suggests a deep weariness, doesn't it? And he also wrote these beautiful, incredibly passionate love poems.
To his wife, Hurrem.
Yes, to her.
And that is the perfect segue, because we have to talk about the personal life. This is where the history feels less like a textbook and more like a high-stakes thriller.
The palace intrigue is just off the charts.
Let's start with her, Hurrem Sultan, or Roxelana, as she was known in the West.
Her story is incredible. It's the ultimate rags to riches, or rather, slave to empress story. She was a captive, likely from modern-day Ukraine, the daughter of an Orthodox priest.
So she enters the harem as a slave.
She enters the harem as just another concubine. And in the Ottoman system, that's usually where the story stays. You might have a son, you might get some influence, but that's it. But she does something completely unprecedented.
She gets him to marry her.
Legally. Ottoman sultans simply did not marry their concubines. They had them to produce heirs, but they deliberately avoided legal marriage to prevent powerful rival families from forming at court.
And Suleiman just throws that tradition out the window for her.
It does. He makes her his legal wife.
Yeah.
And what was even more shocking to his contemporaries, he remained monogamous with her. He set aside all his other concubines.
But she wasn't just a romantic interest. She was a major political player.
A powerhouse. She was given the new title of Haseki Sultan, the chief consort, and she convinced Suleiman to do something radical, move the entire imperial harem from the old palace into the Topkapi Palace itself,
the center of government,
right into the heart of government. This physically placed the women of the court at the center of power in a way they had never been before.
She was signing documents, corresponding with other rulers.
Absolutely. We have letters from her to the King of Poland, to the Queen of Hungary. She influenced state appointments. She advised the Sultan. Historians mark her rise as the beginning of what they call the Sultanate of Women, a period of about 130 years where royal women wielded massive influence over the empire.
But her rise created powerful enemies. And this brings us to the first great tragedy of the reign. Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha.
Ibrahim.
This guy was Suleiman's best friend.
Best friend almost doesn't cover it. It was an intense, lifelong bond. Ibrahim was, like Hurrem, a converted Christian slave. They grew up together.
The sources say they were inseparable.
They reportedly slept in the same bed as youths. They shared every meal. Suleiman promoted him from being a royal falconer all the way up to Grand Vizier and commander-in-chief of the armies. He gave him absolute power.
Power corrupt.
It does. Ibrahim's power and his arrogance eventually went to his head. He started using titles that sounded, well, dangerously sultanic. He referred to himself as Sultan in negotiations.
And critically, he clashed with Hurrem.
He did. He supported Suleiman's eldest son, Prince Mustafa, as the heir. Hurrem obviously wanted her own sons to succeed.
That's a dangerous game to play against Hurrem Sultan.
It was a fatal game. In 1536, Suleiman made a choice. He invited Ibrahim to the palace for Ramadan dinner. They ate together, just like old times.
He knew what was coming.
He had to have. Ibrahim went to sleep in an adjacent room, and in the middle of the night, a team of executioners entered and strangled him.
Imagine that. You eat dinner with your closest friend, knowing you've already signed his death warrant.
It shows the ruthless side of Suleiman. State comes first, personal feelings are secondary. The Sultan has no friends. But if you think that's dark...
The story of his son, Mustafa, is even darker.
The execution of Prince Mustafa, this is the one that really sticks with people. It haunted the empire for generations.
So Mustafa was Suleiman's eldest son, the first in line. But his mother was Mahidevran, not Hurrem.
Correct. And Mustafa was the golden child. He was incredibly popular with the army, with the janissaries, and with the people. He was seen as the perfect warrior prince, the ideal successor.
So why kill him?
Paranoia and court intrigue. For years, there were rumors, very likely fueled by Hurrem and her son-in-law, the new Grand Vizier Rustem Pasha, that Mustafa was planning to overthrow his aging father.
Did they have any proof?
They forged letters, supposedly from Mustafa to the Shah of Persia, suggesting a conspiracy. They played on Suleiman's deepest fears of being deposed, just as his own father had deposed his grandfather.
And Suleiman believed them.
He couldn't afford not to. The risk of civil war was too great. So in 1553, during a campaign in Persia, Suleiman summoned Mustafa to his tent.
This scene is just terrifying to visualize. Mustafa enters the tent thinking he's going to talk to his father.
And the tent is empty, silent, except for the mutes, the Sultan's designated executioners.
Why mutes?
So they could not hear or repeat any royal secrets. They attack him. And Mustafa was a strong warrior. He fought them off for a while. It was this violent, desperate struggle inside the Sultan's tent. But eventually they overpowered him and strangled him with a bowstring.
And where was Suleiman while this was happening?
The accounts say he was there, just behind a curtain or a screen, watching or listening to his own son die.
That is absolutely chilling. It breaks the image of the just lawgiver.
It complicates it, doesn't it? In his mind, he was saving the state from a bloody civil war, but the personal cost was immense. His other son, Cihangir, who was sickly and adored Mustafa, reportedly died of grief shortly after hearing the news.
So Suleiman is left with this immense, magnificent empire. But his personal life is a graveyard of the people he loved most.
And often by his own orders.
Which brings us to the end, the final campaign. He's an old man now. It's 1566. He's 71. He's sick with gout and other ailments. But he insists on leading the army to war one last time.
He couldn't even ride a horse. He had to travel in a carriage. They were besieging the fortress of Strigavar in Hungary. It was a tough, grinding fight. And on September 6th, 1566, Suleiman died quietly in his tent.
But the battle wasn't over yet.
No. The fortress hadn't fallen. And this is the wildest part of the story. His Grand Vizier, Sukulu Mehmed Pasha, knew that if the army found out the Sultan was dead, their morale would collapse. They might abandon the siege or even revolt.
Oh, so he had to keep his secret.
He pulled off a deception for the ages.
The kind of weekend at Bernie's situation.
Essentially, yes, but on an imperial scale. They had the Sultan's doctors continue to bring food and medicine to the tent. They buried his heart and organs there in Hungary to help preserve the body.
An army had no idea.
The vizier forged orders in Suleiman's handwriting. He held audiences where officers would see the Sultan's form, propped up on the throne from a distance. They kept the secret for 48 days.
48 days. That is incredible.
All while the siege continued until the fortress finally fell and the new Sultan, Suleiman II, could arrive from the capital to take command. The army was marching and fighting for a dead man.
That is just a testament to the discipline of that system. Even in death, he's commanding the army.
Yet state had to continue.
Now, after he dies, there's this old historical idea that the Ottoman Empire immediately fell off a cliff. The decline thesis.
Right.
But modern historians don't really buy that anymore, do they?
No, that's a very outdated view. The decline thesis was actually partly created by Ottoman writers themselves in the 17th century.
How so?
They used Suleiman's reign as this idealized golden age model to criticize the inflation and corruption of their own time. They were, in a way, saying, make the empire great again, with Suleiman as the benchmark.
And Western historians later took those complaints literally.
They did. They assumed the empire just collapsed. But what was really happening was a transformation. The empire stopped expanding because it had hit its natural logistical limits, like we saw in Vienna. You just can't march an army from Istanbul to Germany and back in one summer.
So it wasn't a decline, it was a pivot.
It was a transformation. It shifted from being a constantly conquering war machine into a more stable, bureaucratic, sedentary state. It remained a formidable world power for centuries.
And his legacy, it's still with us in surprising ways. I was stunned to learn there's a relief portrait of him right here in the U.S.
In the chamber of the House of Representatives, he's depicted alongside figures like Moses, Hammurabi, and Napoleon as one of history's 23 great lawgivers.
That's incredible.
It's a testament to the fact that his reputation for justice and order transcended the religious wars of his time.
And even Shakespeare mentions him.
He does. In The Merchant of Venice, the Prince of Morocco boasts that he has defeated Suleiman in battle. It was just shorthand for ultimate military prowess. Even in Elizabethan England, Suleiman was the benchmark for power.
So, bringing this all together, we have a man of these massive, almost unbelievable contradictions. He expanded the empire to 3 continents, he fought a global trade war in the Indian Ocean, he codified the law, and he pioneered the tulip craze that would later grip Europe.
A true Renaissance man in his own way.
But he also had his best friend and his own son strangled to protect his power.
It is the great paradox of absolute power. There's an inscription at the Citadel of Bender where he lists all his grand titles, and he starts the whole thing with 2 words, God's slave.
God's slave.
God's slave and sultan of this world. He saw himself as an instrument, a servant to a divine mission. He achieved everything a ruler could possibly want. But to maintain that magnificence, he had to be utterly ruthless.
And that raises our final question.
Yeah.
Did the burden of being the Solomon of his age, the magnificent lawgiver, ultimately trap him? The state cannot have friends, and the state cannot have rivals, even if they are your own children. That must have been an incredibly lonely position at the top.
The price of being magnificent.
So the next time you see a picture of that Istanbul skyline, or even just look at a tulip in a garden, maybe remember the complex, heavy history behind them. Thanks for diving in with us.
It was a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.